Hi, I am Cole, and in this video I'm going to show you how I painted this Tyrranid Hormagaunt from the Hive fleet Kronos. This is the first video of a two-part series on how I built and painted a small diorama titled A Duel of Monsters, a Chaos versus Tyrranid duel featuring two monstrous creatures going claw to claw against each other. This first part itself will cover both painting the Hormagaunt and crafting the base of the diorama. Now, from a lore perspective, Tyranids usually avoid areas with strong demonic activity, as fighting chaos offer very little biomass to consume, which usually leads a fleet to waste and eventually exhaust its resources. The Kronos fleet, which is actually a splinter from the Hive fleet Leviathan, is unique in this aspect, as it is actively seeking the taint of chaos on wars along the Great Rift. This seems to be the Hive mind's answer to the increasing threat of corruption that chaos is causing to the galaxy. The Hive mind way to say, don't f with my meat. Alright, let's get started. I started by priming the Hormagaunt with Viero Ghost Grey. Then, with a mix of ivory, black and glaze medium, I sprayed a few thin layers using varying ratios of those two colors, progressively building contrast with shades of medium and bright gray. And with this, the underpainting is done and I am ready to add some color. While the Kronos fleet color scheme is often depicted with a stark black skin and red chitinous armor plates, I will take some freedom for the sake of color composition and replace the black skin with a darker red. This is a mix of black red and deep red applied in very thin layers. I am then using a higher ratio of deep red to paint the chitinous plates and the end of the tail that I would like to keep a brighter red. Now, with black red and a hint of Viero black, I go back to the skin to build darker transitions. This is a very thin model and the postures makes it a little awkward to reach part of the skin with the airbrush. But overall, I'm happy with it. Using Viero black, I am painting those fleshy bits with extra dilution for this first layer so the paint runs in all recesses. Onto highlighting the armor plates with strokes of deep red. I am keeping the color transitions subtle as this is first and foremost the foundation for brighter highlights. Also, I won't go crazy with the amount of striation as this is a small model and I don't want to end up with overwhelming details on those plates. This is also the opportunity to start highlighting some of the flesh by glazing over those bits with the same deep red. And just as for the previous fleshy elements, I am painting every joint in Viero black. I realized at that point that I forgot painting the chest plates, so I glazed them with deep red to match the other parts. Part of the reason why I didn't paint the skin black is that I wanted this Hormagaunt to have black claws and talons, which I find made them look terrifying and should look pretty good once highlighted. Still using deep red as a glaze, I added a few highlights to the torso. Let's give that flesh some contrast with a wash of non-oil. Rather than dumping the wash all over the skin, I am making it pour in places that I want to be the darkest and meticulously glaze it otherwise to preserve the brighter areas. Well, this is a good start and it is now time to give some definition to the chitinous plates. For this second pass of highlights, I used a mix of deep red and ice yellow, making sure to leave some of the previous deep red highlights visible to create a smooth transition between the plates and highlights. The difference between both passes might not be as striking here on camera, and if you are to paint your Tyranids at a more tabletop standard, you might want to save yourself a lot of time by skipping this step and jump right away to a brighter tone. As I work on those edges, I am progressively raising the ratio of ice yellow to build brighter highlights. You can see me using the side of the brush wherever I can to quickly and easily paint those edges. But some of those plates, like here on the head, do require to use the tip of the brush and a more steady hand. Working with a monotone scheme has a few perks, particularly if you are looking to speed up your output. But as a purely organic faction, I would need to include some variety if I were to paint a full Tyrannid army. They don't have any form of clothing, heraldry, or squad markings, so it's all about painting with hues and adding fun bits like bioluminescence. Looking at how sharp and detailed those Tyranids are, I don't even need to add much texture to those plates for them to look good. This is starting to look interesting, but the skin needs some work, like adding definition to the face with a glaze of deep red. Those new miniatures definitely have a ton of small sculpted elements that you can easily make pop with a few highlights. Properly defining those elements will help give life to your models and definitely make them stand out on the field of battle. Again, increasing the amount of ice yellow for deep red, I'm highlighting the sharpest edges with that brighter color, with each layer covering less surface to create a natural gradient. Alright, time to better blend those plates and highlights by thinning down deep red to a glaze consistency and applying it all over the armor plates. This is taking away some of the highlights in the process, but creates better transitions between those shades. I can then bring back the brighter highlights using the same ice yellow and deep red mix as before. To highlight the black fleshy bits, I am using black with a touch of ice yellow. I have minimal paint on my brush to ensure that the paint doesn't run into those recesses. Then I mixed in more ice yellow to paint brighter grey highlights. Talking about highlights, let's take care of those nightmarish claws using the same ice yellow and black recipe. As for the armor plates, I am painting those edges with the side of my brush, and as long as you have minimal paint loaded on your brush and you manage to lightly pass over those edges, you should be able to create those neat highlights without too much struggle. And again, layer by layer, I am painting brighter and smaller highlights. I am glazing here some black red to create a cleaner transition from dark red to black on the two large scything talons. Let's return to the skin with a mix of black red and sun yellow to highlight those growths and other prototyping bits. Whenever you are diverting from an established color scheme, your painting process isn't likely to be linear, but more some kind of back and forth as you are bound to experiment with hues and contrasts on your test model. You won't always have the complete vision from the get-go or what it's going to take to get there. This is why you'll see me progress carefully and avoid making big jumps in luminance when painting those brighter surfaces. I went for a mix of frog green and turquoise to paint the tongue. This is a choice driven by both color theory and color composition, as this will create a continuity with the second character of this diorama. And finally, to highlight the tongue, I added ivory to the frog green and turquoise mix. For the teeth, I started with a sand yellow base layer. To highlight them, I added ivory to the sand yellow base. And with that ivory ready on my palette, I decided to use it to paint the eyes. This is giving it a cold and mindless killer stare, and I quite like it. The two large talons and other claws, like elements, are getting a final pass of highlights with pure ivory. I decided to add some definition to the hooves by highlighting the edges, using the same recipe as for the talons. The talon skin needs some extra work, so I am adding highlights using a mix of deep red, ice yellow and a hint of black red. I am adding the final touch to the plates with small bright highlights painted with a mix of deep red, ice yellow and ivory. This is only for the most exposed edges and should stay relatively subtle. And finally, with the same ratio of deep red, ice yellow and black red that I used to highlight the tip of the tail, I am highlighting a few select elements that will make the miniature pop. Okay, the miniature itself is nearly complete, and even if I will add a few details here and there later on, I really need to start building the base of this diorama. For this, I am going to merge those two pieces of slate stones to form a larger platform. I started by drilling both sides to insert a small wooden stick. This will help hold together the two pieces while the glue cures. Next, I did the same thing to the part of the rock that will be in contact with a wood base that I cut and sanded to a smooth finish. I wrapped the wood in cellophane to protect it and temporarily attached the rock so I could safely merge everything together with epoxy clay. This is a two-part epoxy putty that once cured will become very hard and strongly bonded to the stone. Using a sculpting tool, I started by pushing some putty into that gap and use a shaper to smooth it to form a natural connection between the two pieces of slate stone. Using the same shaper, I added some texture and went on to add extra mass to that rock to make it more dynamic, with two small elevations that will be holding both miniatures. We are often adding small pieces of real stone mixed to the putty, like on the earthkin wire diorama we made in the past, an easy and quick way to add texture and sharpness to your sculpt. Using a sanding stick, I shaped sharp edges to make the rock easier to highlight. Alright, this is going just as visualized so far, but now on to a little scary part. I want to be able to remove both miniatures from this diorama, so they could also stand as single model or to be played on the tabletop. I usually use small metal rods for this, but I decided to go for magnets this time. Drilling a fully painted miniature, what could go wrong? I placed a magnet into the base and used painting tape to safely glue the other one just in the right spot. This way I am sure that the magnet in the miniature is aligned to the one in the base. This piece of metal sticking out of the rubble looks totally out of place, so I am going to sculpt a piece of rock to hide it. Over a painted mini? Again, what could go wrong? I actually stopped recording while sculpting the base to be fully focused on the miniature, so let's jump right to the painting. I primed the rock with several strong layers of ghost grey surface primer, and once fully cured, placed the Hormagaunt on top of it so I could paint its base at the same time as the rock. A few layers of cellophane and some masking putty kept the miniature safe. I used Bio Air Black as the base layer for the rock as I want it to look good but not to distract from what really matters, which is the duel of two monsters ready to rip each other apart. I also painted the base of the miniature in black. I mixed in a touch of white to give more definition to a few parts of the rock. This is quite subtle on camera but will help blending in the dry brushing. For that step, I use a mix of black and ivory, gently brushing all over the rock to make the texture stand out. I am switching between darker and brighter ratios of those two paints to achieve the right contrast and a somewhat natural look. And the same steps were used for the Tyrranid base to properly blend it with the larger rock. Not too bad, what do you think? Using ivory, I delicately brushed over the most exposed edges without going too bright as to leave myself some room for future highlighting. I am using non-oil to add depth to the whole base that for now lacks a bit of contrast. This is actually serving us in two ways. First, by flowing into every recesses to add deeper contrast to the rock. Secondly, by blending those transitions and make it look a little more natural. But as some of the highlights got muted by the wash, I am using ivory to bring some of it back with dry brushing. But as useful as this technique can be, I completed the rock with precise and very deliberate highlights. This also let me bring the overall painting style of the base closer to the one used for the miniatures, which are rich in edge highlights. The base itself is now complete and I can bring my attention back to the Hormagaunt. Just as for the base, I use non-oil to add more depth and contrast to the miniature. This is also letting me darken part of the flesh in a fast but controlled way and bring it a tad closer to the original skin. This is much better and I can now focus on detailing the flesh. I am mixing together black red, deep red, ivory and ice yellow to highlight the flesh and bring out all those details. Those miniatures are so detailed and well defined that it doesn't take much effort or precision to make them look interesting. I only have a few highlights to add here and there to the armor plates. You got to love the time when you add the final details to a paint job and you start feeling the glorious joy of completion. And this is it. The Hormagaunt is now complete. I hope that you enjoyed the first part of this diorama and look forward to share with you the second part in the coming days. Until then, take care and I'll see you in the next video.